Now, this is going to be a very sports-heavy podcast this week. It wasn't really what I had intended, but it's just what the news gods kind of provided us with this week. I mean, of course, we could always talk about Wall Street bets and the whole stocks thing, but I'm going to hold off on that for a week if I talk about it all. Because of course the biggest thing that I have to get to. I mean, I think that this is probably the longest into a podcast that I've ever gone without actually mentioning the UFC. But hey, we've reached that point of the podcast. Now we have to talk about the results from UFC 257. And man, I got to tell you that, hey, obviously that main event was a huge surprise to me. I honestly thought that Conor McGregor was going to defeat Dustin Poirier and go on to probably fight the winner of Hooker and Chandler for the vacant lightweight championship. But as everybody's seen, that's not what happened. Conor McGregor, he got knocked out in the second round, and as a matter of fact, he actually managed to have that happen to him. It was very similar to what happened to Paulo Costa. When Paulo Costa came out and he fought Israel Adesanya for the middleweight championship of the world. And he came out and he didn't bother to defend any of Adesanya's calf kicks. And as a matter of fact, he stood there like an idiot, and he actually invited him to give him more calf kicks, and that debilitated him to the point where he couldn't defend himself against Adesanya's hands, and he got knocked out. Now, he came back and he offered a bunch of excuses afterwards, which thankfully is not what Conor McGregor has done. But Conor McGregor, he lost that fight in a very similar way. And there is an awful lot to be said about that. Even just starting with the detail that, the increasing prevalence of calf kicks in the UFC, that's been something that's kind of been slowly developing over about the last year or so. I mean, the leg kicks and the calf kicks have always been part of it, but not as much of a focus as they have been of late. And so with that long inactivity that Conor McGregor had when he went off to fight Floyd Mayweather, he walked away from his 2 titles. He went and fought Floyd Mayweather, and then he said he was retiring, and then he said that he came back, said that he was coming back, and he came back and he fought Donald Cerrone. And then he said that he was retiring again because he couldn't get the number of fights that he wanted. This is really Conor McGregor's first outing in this kind of new era of the UFC that I think that a lot of people would almost have to call the calf kick era of the UFC. And it was the calf kick that did him in. I mean, in between rounds, you could see just how his leg was absolutely destroyed. And he had his chances to put Dustin Poirier away, and at times in that fight he almost did. But when it came down to it, Poirier found the perfect time to push. He came back, got him down and out, and that was the fight. And so now with his second fight with Poirier in the books, it of course raises the question, what's next for Conor McGregor? Well, McGregor's coach, John Kavanagh, as he would have it, what he wanted to see was, he thought that they were going to go ahead and have the trilogy fight right away in May. And of course, what happened after that was that the Athletic Commission stepped in and they said, no. And they looked at his post-fight medical report and they said that you're going to have to sit out for perhaps as much as 6 months. That leg was just too destroyed in that fight, for him to have another fight in the time frame that he would have wanted. Which is a shame, because what it sounds like is that Conor McGregor, he wants to be fighting once every 3 months. This inactivity over the last year, that was not his plan. That was kind of something that unfortunately kind of got enforced on him by COVID at first. And then he said that he was retiring, and then it took him a little bit of time to get re-engaged with the UFC, enough to actually get this fight. But the plan of trying to fight every 3 months going forward, I mean, obviously that's something that's just not going to happen. And not only does that now not make sense from a medical perspective, but in all honesty, it doesn't make any sense from a competitive perspective. It doesn't make any sense from a commercial, from a marketing perspective. I mean, I think that one thing that we all know, well, as close to as you can know anything with Conor McGregor. But one thing that we're all pretty sure of now is that we're going to get that trilogy fight. You're looking at 2, very good, very proud fighters, neither of which are going to be happy to leave this with a tie. They want to know who is better. I think they need to know who is better. That's what makes them what they are. And so Conor McGregor, he's going to have to go away, and he should have to go put in a couple of fights before he gets back to his chance to fight Poirier again. And I think that Poirier, at this point, he has earned, the privilege of his next fight, regardless of who it's going to be against. He has earned the privilege of his next fight being for the lightweight championship of the world. So who is his opponent in that fight going to be? Well, I haven't been shy about this. I honestly thought that opponent should be the winner of the Hooker versus Chandler fight. I wasn't alone. Chael Sonnen, he also thought that the winner should be... He always thought that the opponent in that fight to fill the vacant lightweight championship of the world should be the winner between Chandler and Hooker. Of course, against, the winner of McGregor and Poirier. It was basically like an unofficial four-man tournament. And these fights this last weekend were title eliminators. But Poirier has already said that he will not accept a fight from Chandler. At this particular juncture, he says that Chandler just doesn't have enough under his belt in the UFC. He's too new, so Poirier won't entertain it. Puts the UFC in a little bit of a an awkward position, because really, when you look at that lightweight division right now, the way that things have been going, it's really about three guys. It's about Poirier, Chandler, and Oliveira. They are kind of the three top stars in that division right now. I mean, Justin Gaethje, of course, he doesn't go away from that scenario. Conor McGregor, he doesn't go away from that scenario. But the way that the UFC bookers like to do things is that they like to match up guys who have been winning. And they like to match up guys who have been losing. So when you look at the plans for the future of this division, you would have to think that Poirier's next fight would have to be either with Chandler or Charles Oliveira. Then you would have to think that McGregor's next fight would have to be against Gaethje, Ferguson, Hooker, or maybe even against Nate Diaz. I mean, Nate Diaz, he's coming back to this division recently enough that pretty much he does need to go out and get a win. And really, from a commercial perspective, it just doesn't make any sense to do that in any less than, say, 1 whole year. There's a lot of things that can happen in 1 whole year. I mean, in 1 whole year, the COVID-19 pandemic could largely be over. One thing that Joe Rogan was talking about on his podcast this week is that, well, hey, you have to do McGregor Poirier 3. Now it has to happen. So you wait until COVID's over, go to Ireland, do it in one of their massive soccer stadiums there, and just have like an unreal spectacle. You could literally have a WrestleMania of MMA. You could have a Super Bowl of MMA in a soccer stadium in Ireland. It would be absolutely popping mad off the just off the chain. Just unbelievable how good something like that could be. And with McGregor in that main event, fighting for the lightweight championship of the world against the fighter who is arguably his top rival of his entire career, that place would be an absolute madhouse. I mean, they would absolutely kill that gate. The pay-per-view would just slay anything that they've done almost to date. Okay, maybe I'm exaggerating, because they have had some amazing things in the past, but you set that card up properly, with maybe the lightweight championship of the world in the main event, and then you go down maybe in the co-main event. You could even have the heavyweight championship in the co-main event on the same card, and then you could drop down and you could have, say, one of the women's championships or maybe the bantamweight championship on that same card. That would be absolutely gigantic. Okay, that's all speculation. And I have to be honest with you, that really got away from me there. I was really starting to get just excited, just thinking about all of the things that they could do around an event like that. I think that is definitely something that the UFC should aim for. But as it pertains to Conor McGregor in particular, quite frankly, he's just, if you lose that fight in that situation, if you have just lost a fight, I don't think that MMA can afford to become a sport where somebody can be entitled to a title shot. Can lose a fight and then just be entitled to go on and fight for the championship, or even be allowed to think that they're just entitled to go on and fight for a championship just because they happen to be the biggest star. And, there's no doubt about it. In MMA right now, Conor McGregor is the biggest star. But the size of the star in this particular case really should not amount to a hill of beans. Not in terms of deciding who has the right to fight for that championship. Or rather, I should say the privilege, because nobody has the right. You have to earn that privilege to fight for that championship, especially in a division like the light heavyweight division right now. So really, Conor McGregor, he needs the next year just to go off and earn himself another chance at that championship. I mean, I don't think that it would necessarily take a full year. He could do it in less than a year. But I think that the anticipation would best be kind of stretched out over a year. On the business end of it, I think that's the one thing that makes a lot of sense. But even beyond that, George St. Pierre, this week, he said that basically Conor McGregor, he needs to be reborn. He needs to go back to formula. He needs to go back to his roots to rediscover all of those things that made him such a great fighter. Things that he didn't really have a chance to rediscover in that very, very short match against Donald Cerrone. And things that it seems like maybe he's gotten away from, in what was in actuality, pretty close to a 3 year, to more than a 3 years stretch away from the UFC octagon. I mean, there's a lot of in and outs in this game. It's not like riding a bike. You don't never forget these things. You don't never forget what it's like to take a punch against one of the best fighters in the world. You don't never forget what it's like to get your leg kicked off by one of the best fighters in the world. But it is possible to take that time away and forget exactly what it was that allowed you to keep the edge, that allowed you to push through those things. Things that, as great a fighter as Donald Cerrone is, he didn't really present that challenge to Conor McGregor. In the octagon with Dustin Poirier, McGregor faced that challenge again, and this time he didn't have what it took to overcome it. So he needs to go off and he needs to fight a challenger that can make him face that again. And this time he needs to go off, he needs to face that challenge again, and he needs to overcome it. Maybe he needs to do that 2 or 3 times before he has any business being back in the octagon with Dustin Poirier.